Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is David Tom's session. David, what's the title of your session? You're muted. You've already failed.
I know. It's not just my session. It's mine and David Salazar's session. This is an info session on the minimum UX requirements for the service release process that we have in UIT. UIT stands for University IT here at Stanford.
Super. I'm the moderator. I'll be watching things in chat. Feel free to come off mute if you have any questions, or you can use the raise hand function in Zoom, or you can just raise your hand. I'll be watching and I'll be trying to make sure that the conversation goes smoothly. And with that, I will pass it over again to, I don't know, David Salazar. Who's up next?
David Tom.
I think I am. I'm David Tom. I'm the manager of UX and design operations here at Stanford in UIT, which is our university IT, and we're in a subgroup called web services. But we do more than just web. It's kind of crazy. We do web and we do client applications and mobile and other fun things too. So groovy tunes. So David, please introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, I'm David Salazar. I'm a UX researcher as well, Stanford Web Services, same department. Right? I work with David Tom and John.
Thanks, David. And this is going to be pretty informal. It's an info session. We're gonna tour some websites that some of you might have been, but we'll add context and things like that. It's a lot of actual content, so we'll just kind of guide you through the content or to the content, and take a lot of questions hopefully at the end. So let me share my screen. I've tested this, so it's supposed to work. If I could only find the right window. David, if you don't mind, if you could throw links into the chat for the pages that we're on. They're in our notes.
Sounds good.
Okay, so this is the web page for this minimum requirements for the service release process in UIT. So before we start, spending too much time getting into this, we should probably take a step back and say, what is the service release process? So let's just do a quick rundown through there. We're not going to spend too much time on this. I am not the service owner for this, so I will likely make mistakes when we talk about this. But service management at Stanford is about lifecycle management of a product or service that we have most of the time, and we're talking about a technology service, but that often has other arms to it. Service design oriented things that in-person services and other parts of service. And hey, Joanne Cuevas is there. She's in the service design department over in another group. They do great stuff. So this is the overall service management page, and talks about the toolkit, and that's where we kind of start to come in. But this is where you can learn about service management. The toolkit's kind of handy because it kind of covers all the things that they're trying to cover in service management. So, hey, what are some things to think about before you do a service? Let's make sure we think about service security and compliance. Are you using a vendor? Let's make sure we're doing that right. Does it require any ordering, provisioning, or billing? Let's make sure we get that right. And as we move along, communications and readiness, do we have communications plans and things like that? This is all before you set out a service. Let's make sure we're doing these things. Do we need support? Is there maintenance? Is it accessible and is it usable? So those are the kind of main areas covered in the toolkit. And then, as you know, well, not as you know, and from this, they've developed a process to help people make sure that they are hitting all these points in the service release or in the service management toolkit. So there's a process in which we can ensure this stuff is happening, and also that there's some validation that it happened with different folks. So this is the service release process. This is an internal process for UIT. At Stanford, if you are not in UIT, you will not have access to this. Although, if you are launching a service and working with a UIT partner, you are probably going through this process if it meets a certain level of a certain standard of need. And that's mostly explained here. Again, I'm not going to get too far into it. We're just going to assume that, you know, in the context of this conversation, that the service or product that you're launching requires is required to go through this process, and we're handling only the UX portion of it. And then we're going to get there in 1 second. So this is kind of like all the different phases in the process. And as you can see, we got all these things again, same things. We've already seen those. And then it comes down to like what the actual stuff is. So from here, you can find our page. Back to this page, thank goodness. I'm much more comfortable talking about this page than the other page and all we have here. So in the service release process, there's for UX, there are different levels of rigor associated with different scopes or sizes of projects. These are just the beginners of where we start. It's just kind of like a starting point. There's a lot of nuance that comes along with this, but in each of these service areas, theoretically, if it's pretty clear that you're in this area, one could go ahead and get started on the process for a small project. We recommend everyone comes and talks to us in the office hours, and you can do that via this link here. And then also that information is shared through the service release process. So the other fun part about this is actually we use a lot of these same templates for our work when we do UX work at web services. These most of these items here are intended to be self-service. They have a bit of recipes to them. That's what we were aiming at. They're not super easy to complete. Not all of them are super easy if you've never done it before. So office hours are key, or reaching out and getting some help if you need it through the office hours or contacting us via email. So let's jump into one.
But I just wanted to add, David.
Yeah, please.
One thing is, all of these are intended to be pragmatic. They're not super easy, but they're not super difficult either. We're trying to get to that sweet spot where, again, self-service, you can go there and try to get started. And if you need assistance, you go to the office hours.
Thanks, David. That is a very important distinction. So here's small, and you'll notice that the smaller the project, the focus is more on strategy and making sure that you're aware of what your users are trying to do, which is a part of UX as well, because we need to be consciously designing or building software for specific uses. So you can see here in the steps we have right over here, and there is, identify the problem and top user tasks. So what are we really trying to solve here, and what do users need to do? What do they need to be able to do? So there's some procedure here. Summarize your problem statement, and then we have some job aids that are intended to start to build that documentation. So state your problems, start getting into your tasks. What are the motivations? Who are the users? And what are you hoping to be able to do? And then depending on how complex the tasks are, we may have to get into like more heavy task analysis. It's not required for everything. And I literally just had a conversation with someone going through the process yesterday, and I said, don't do this until you do the first two and then come talk to us, and then we can figure out what's going on. Again, trying to be as pragmatic as possible. Sorry, leaking back through because I don't want to. Again, here's, with each of these, we have a set of procedure and a tool or a template to work with. And if it's not making sense, come talk to us at office hours. We expect if you've done this kind of work before, it should be fairly straightforward. If you've never done it before, it could be bewildering. But we're hoping that it's at least, follow the tasks. It seems like it makes sense, but of course, come talk to us. So that's step one. Step two is get user feedback. This is again for small. By the way, a lot of the folks that launch products and services at Stanford are using third-party SaaS applications, and a lot of times those don't necessarily fit directly into any of these. Even more reason to come talk to us, because it might be going out to a lot of people, but we may not have a lot of ability to do much with it. So we would come up kind of with a custom process for those folks, depending on what it is. Get some user feedback. That's the next step. We have a procedure here we like that works for a lot of folks, and it's relatively easy to administrate, either in a conversation or a survey. You can do a what if, I like what if with, sorry, I wish what if workshop. And then you can also ask those questions in the context of a survey and get some good feedback. And that's just, again, getting you started. The intent with this is more inward facing, indirect feedback from stakeholders and advocates for your users, or sometimes surrogates, user surrogates that can represent them very well.
Or hopefully you've heard from some of the people that are using this.
Yeah, that too. So we have a few ways to get this done here. And now regardless of how big or small, we definitely want to make sure that we're using identity and style guidelines. So we're just making sure people are pointed to where they need to start from. Let's make sure we got the colors right. Let's make sure we have identity right, and some styling guidelines just to help get it oriented. This is just a starter point, and with a small piece of functionality that's already happening within an existing set of functionality or an application or whatever, hopefully that's already happening. But if it's not, then we can make sure that we're doing it. If it's a new piece of technology or a SaaS product, this is all the information you would need to kind of get it themed correctly. So, and then step 4. Okay. Let's just make sure we're doing things ways that is already kind of understood as being a best practice. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. I think this kind of goes hand in hand with the identity, branding, and style guidelines. If you're using those, you're probably using some of those best practices, especially if you're using the decanter patterns. Even if you're not using the decanter code, if you're using the decanter patterns, those have already been kind of reviewed, and for accessibility and for and they're already based on common web patterns.
What is decanter?
Oh, decanters are our design system that we're using here at Stanford Web Services for some of our products. There's a link to it in that step 3 page. So job 8 here is kind of a checkboxed question and answer. For each of your tasks, we would have you write in the task name and then go through the tasks and say, hey, is it clear where the users are on their site? Here's all these usability criteria. We have some visual hierarchy criteria, content criteria, and information architecture criteria. And, as you fill this out, we're hoping you're doing well. We're hoping you're at 100. But there's some scoring happening there. It's just to give you an idea of where you are and how you're doing on it. And last but not least, let's make sure that we have a plan moving forward to continue measurement and see how we're doing, how your product or service is going. Let's check in 3 to 6 months, a year after launch, depending on how, what makes sense for the service that you're delivering. And let's make sure that we, have a plan to get feedback, and then also to iterate based on that feedback if necessary. And from there, you'd kind of just go right back to the beginning to set 2 here and say, okay, what's the feedback? What do we need to change?
I have
So
a
that's
question. Janice in the chat, saying that the department chair has their own priorities for sites. What's the best way to encourage incorporating users' feedback? Also, is there a way to determine globally what users are searching for? Keywords.
Let's see. I think I need to see that. Well, there's user priorities and there's business priorities, and those always have to be balanced. That's your first statement there, and I think that's where the user feedback is very helpful in helping to communicate to the stakeholders on any project, like what users are struggling with and what's important to them. Usually the best approach for representing, usability issues and such is actual user feedback, or if you have recordings of people using stuff, if you've done usability testing and you have those recordings and the reports on what's working and what's not working for them. I do think that always has to be balanced with business priorities. And hopefully there's a way that those are aligned enough where you're really helping meet both of those goals at the same time. Globally, what users are searching for and keywords only kind of depends on what search technology you're using. So.
Yeah, you're getting into a little bit of analytics, and we cover a little bit on the Medium project.
Yep.
About how you may go about approaching that, but it doesn't really go in depth into that area.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump back in. Medium, I'm just checking time here. Well, I'm trying to get through this in about 20 minutes so we can have lots of time for questions, but keep them coming. So the big difference between medium and small is we've added 2 steps. So a light user discovery and a usability testing and research. So let's jump into light user discovery. Oops, dang it. Double clicked. Okay. So we want to start anytime we're doing any formal discovery, we want to make sure we have a research plan set up so we can make sure we know, what are our goals? What are we trying to learn? What's the best methodology to learn those things? Let's keep on thinking about what participants we're going to need to know or need to have to meet those things. Sometimes to learn something, you do have to have a specific type of participant. Depends on the audience of your site. Sometimes you can get away with general, if it's like a pure usability thing and there's not a bunch of nomenclature issues with your audience, then you can have pretty much anyone go through and test those things, if it's general enough of a topic. So, but absolutely, sometimes it's important to get a very narrow participant profile for your testing. So there's a couple ways, options that we have here. You can do a survey or usability testing in this section. It kind of oh wait, was that the other one? That's the other one, huh? That's usability.
No, you're right. You're right. This is the one you can do.
Okay, cool.
Usability testing. It's once you open the document. Yeah.
So in this one, we have the option for a survey, but and once you get into the test plan, it's also possible that you can do usability testing. Sometimes you want to just skip straight to usability testing if you feel like you have a survey is not going to meet your goals as far as what you need to learn or not.
Hey,
So,
Dave,
yeah.
does your group assist clients with doing usability testing?
Sure does.
Or, okay.
Yeah. So the research plan template, yeah, the intent of all of this is that it can be self-serve.
Yeah.
Large is technically not self-serve. You have to hire some kind of professionals, or if you have UX professionals in your team, then you can do it. But we really want that those projects are big enough, 1,000+ users, Stanford faculty, Stanford students, possibly high-risk data situations where we really need to make sure that we have like UX professionals working on it. Whereas we think with the small and the medium, it's probably decent enough to self-serve, but again, come have a conversation with us, because we may find that we have a small where it actually needs a UX professional if it's a super complex interaction.
Trying to be conscious of budgets too, right?
Yeah.
All these projects are going to vary, budget wise.
Yeah.
Again, trying to be as pragmatic as we can. A lot of the folks in University IT don't have UX team on staff with access to them. So this is the template for the survey or the usability testing. And it kind of has all those sections that we talked about, but it also starts to kind of get into, hey, what are some possibilities for us? And then getting into kind of walking through the whole process and having a kind of a guide and a place for you to document all the things that you need for your research plan. And then we have a survey template. Okay, there we go there. That plan is intended to be used for this and the usability testing. So in the usability testing, the intent here is to have this done early enough in the implementation phase so you could learn from it and then edit, iterate, and on your solution. So this is an in-process type of usability test of the new functionality or service that you have. So early, it could be done from prototypes. It could be done from an early version of the product. So that kind of thing. But this is a plan for the usability testing and the job aids and process for that.
Right. And those are two distinct steps, just to reiterate, step 3 and step 4. So you might do like a usability testing with your current site so that you can learn about the top issues that people are dealing with. And then once you start actually developing a solution, early on, hopefully you can do another round to see if you move the needle. Did it improve some of the things that you were trying to improve? Did you address the problems you encountered? So
right.
Or you start with a survey.
Yeah.
Then you move on to usability testing later.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Okay. Those are the two sections that are different than small. Okay. And then so we have large. And large is basically medium, except under step 3 here, we kind of have it folded in as, hey, let's work with a UX professional. So the intent here is that you would do steps 1 and 2, and then engage with some UX professionals. The intent is with steps 1 and 2, you learn a little bit more about your problem and your users, and that will help you engage with the UX professionals, either internally or externally. They'll help you have the conversation that they'll need to have to scope and understand what work will be needed. Additionally, if you are not prepared to do steps 1 and 2, you could absolutely engage with a UX firm or internal UX folks earlier, and just build that into your RFP process. So we have a couple RFP templates. These are the ones that we try and keep them up to date. We have one that we use internally for smaller projects, kind of a simplified RFP, and the larger one links off to the one I think that is used by our vendor management team. But we definitely feel you should probably talk to our vendor management team too if you are working with a firm that hasn't been vetted yet. So that is the whole process. Everything else in large is basically the same. Of course, if you're engaging with a firm, they're likely to do all this work for you, right? So these steps. I'm going to stop the share for 1 second. How's it going? That was a lot of information. I felt like I did a lot of talking.
Good, you
Yeah,
did.
it's great stuff.
Is it making sense?
Yeah. Very helpful.
Janice, were we able to answer your questions?
Yeah, the first part, I thought there was a second part also that
Yeah, the search question is a tough one for us. So what's the best way to encourage incorporating users' feedback? Depending on how you're managing your project or your service, it's nice to have backlogs. If you're using Agile, have backlogs. If you're not using Agile, just have a list, a prioritized list of things that you need to do on the project. That's basically what a backlog is anyway. And get those issues kind of identified and prioritized based on how severe those UX issues are. If in your usability testing people are not able to complete the task, then that's a pretty big deal. That's going to have to get prioritized pretty high if that's a highly prioritized task that you're trying to get them to be able to do.
And early on, sometimes it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg situation where, not having done a lot of user research, people may not be convinced that there's a need for it. But once you start doing small amounts of it, you can sort of expose people to what the results and the outcomes can be, and some of the information that you can learn from that. And it sort of encourages people to want to do more of it.
Yeah, you often usually get feedback on when you're doing those types of testing. You can also test on whether or not the communication goals of a website are being met, like the business goals. And those are often failing because of usability or UX or visual design or visual hierarchy type of issues. So they all kind of fall into this UX realm. One of the things I think I'll say something that's completely typical of the old school academic website with the mission on the homepage, and it's a big wall of text. That's probably the worst way to get your mission understood by your users, because they're just trying to do something else and they're going to get freaked out by a big wall of text and they're just going to move on. So that's where sometimes what we think we want to do as being the best way to communicate something around what we're trying to achieve is not always the best way. We get back to storytelling. Thanks, John. I know that's the education website.
You knew I was going to pull it up.
I didn't even have to look at it. I know it's the education website XKCD. And that's true. Sorry. Sometimes the best way is to storytell and show don't tell, as opposed to just tell. And I think when you have a mission statement on the homepage, that's telling, and you want to be in the story, in the showing. Let's use opportunities with content here and there to get people to understand what the mission is, more by the actions of the organization rather than what it says it's doing. Hopefully that helps, Janice.
Joanne, were you going to say something? I saw you come off mute. No.
Me?
Yes. No. Okay.
I could say a lot,
Yeah.
but I won't. No, we just finished doing a usability review. Our team did on the organizational hierarchy. And the interesting thing for us, one of the harder parts is when you come back to the project team and you have 67 issues that we feel, could be addressed. But we are rating those issues at different severity levels, like you were talking about. We have high severity, we have medium severity, we have low severity. So if someone can't finish a task because of an error or something like that, that's definitely rated a high severity. They've got to fix this issue. There's a bug in the system. Something's not working right. If they can finish the task, but they needed to do like somewhat of a workaround, or just kind of fudge the system a little bit, we'll rate that a medium, which means take care of this as soon as you can, or include this in your next enhancement life cycle. And then the low severity is maybe a typo, or something was placed on the page that kind of got skewed or off center or offside or wherever it was supposed to be. So we would rate those as low because the person can finish the task, but it is repeatable that they see this thing. So they should include that into one of their enhancement life cycles. So it's a really cool process, I think. I like it. I enjoy it because you're looking at someone else's application or their website or whatever it is that they're doing. And you're really just, you are teasing it apart a little bit. You know, you are saying, what is the user's perception of this page as they're looking at it? Is it something that they can recognize that is consistent with other websites? For example, like you're filling out a form and you have to submit it. Where's that submit button? Is it up at the top or is it at the bottom? Is it at the right or is it at the left? You know, so and a lot of websites would have you fill out a form and then hit a submit button at the bottom. But there are some sites that you're going to come across that you fill out the whole form, go all the way to the bottom, have to scroll all the way back up to the top to find that apply or submit. So those are the kinds of things we look out for on websites and applications that we're reviewing. But it's, you know, like I said, it's quite interesting. And for the for the usability testing, we'll bring in, you know, 5 to 8 people to test an application. We'll give them a scenario and we'll just say, you know, how would you do this using this application? We don't give them any instructions. You know, this is where we find out whether or not a task for this application or website is actually intuitive. If we find them struggling, not knowing where to start, obviously there's no intuitive starting point. There's, you know, so that's something that we would identify as a pain point and perhaps reconsider, you know, where you're going to put that starting point at. But the hardest part about the usability testing, when you have these 5 to 8 testers, is not being able to help them. Because you see them stuck and you just want to like, oh, here, you got to do this and you got to push that button or you got to write this thing in there. And you just can't. I mean, that's the whole idea of it. You're just standing back, you're a fly on the wall, you're watching them and you're seeing their struggles, you're taking down this information, and then that's what's going back to the project team. So, and then of course, before even starting that testing, you're telling your users, if you can't complete this process, it's not your fault. You know, I mean, this is why we're doing this, because we want to find out if there's some issues with completing this process, going across this application or this website. So I would suggest that if you have a new application or a new product or a new service, get it tested. Get it tested before you roll it out to your users, whether
So we
that's
only-
with the UX team or with our team or whoever it is. But
So we only have a few more minutes here.
Yeah.
And
I'm
so I
sorry
wanted to
about
see if there's any questions that we have from folks yet. Janice?
I'm wondering if you can recommend other analytic tools besides Google and I guess other pages within Google Analytics for testing and analyzing the site and seeing where problem areas are.
I think it mostly just kind of depends on what you're trying to learn. And analytics is only one pathway to learn about what's happening on your site, and often just tells you what's happening, but not why it's happening. And it's kind of a recording of what's happening in user data. But there's a lot of tools out there. I think it's again, it depends on what you're looking for. And
Yeah,
David,
I think unfortunately it'd be out of scope for the topic of this conversation, but we do have a community in practice at Stanford, UXers.
Mhm.
And we meet, what is it, every other Friday, David? Maybe we
Yeah,
can put a
and-
link in
yeah.
there. And
there's also the content strategists community of practice, and those folks actually probably spend more time in analytics than the UX folks do.
Oh, wow.
There's some overlap, but there's a lot of those folks spend more time in Google Analytics
Mhm.
or types of
Thank you.
analytics software, analysis software. The thanks for the earlier question. Let me share my screen real quick. So there's a lot here, as we talked about. You know, there's different levels of complexity, and for sure, in the conversation, if you're going through the process for service release at Stanford, then please set up office hours to at least get an initial consult. and then we can really assess like what is needed. And if we find out that if the scope of what we have that you need to get done for your project is out of something that you don't have the time or the expertise on hand to do, even if it's any of these processes, then we can either work out an estimate for you from our team or other teams, and then we can also suggest vendors if necessary in different types of things. So again, and the intent is to be pragmatic. This is a starting point of the conversation.
Yeah. I would also recommend you actually click through some of the documents and some of the template, the job aids, because a lot of them actually have a lot of explanations as to what goes into planning some of these things. So like the usability testing template goes into a little bit more depth than so the discovery and the survey template. And it will walk you a little bit through some of the things that Joanna was referencing. Yeah, in terms of what is it that you're trying to learn from your users, and how can you go about doing that in a sample script? Like how should you address what are some of the things that you should tell them ahead of time when you're doing that? So yeah, so explore the website in office hours.
Yeah, and then the other thing too is that it's this particular the service release process is, as I mentioned, is also a Stanford UIT thing. We've kind of decided to make this available publicly because a lot of our clients are not with they may not be in UIT, but they have to go through this process, so it's important for them to see it as well, but also just so folks can use it if they need to use it for whatever. If you're doing something that's outside the service release process and you want to take advantage of some of these things, then go for it. That's why they're out there, and that's why these are out in public.
You talked a lot about UX and service releases, particularly for websites and web applications. The service release process, as I understand it, is for any service that rolls out from UIT. Can you talk, what challenges have you seen in terms of applying the UX component of the service release process to things that are not websites or web applications?
Anything that has a UI, so is where the UX side of it comes from. There's services that UIT provides that don't have a UI, right? So UX would not be involved in those types of things. I doubt accessibility would be as either, but if I mentioned we'll see, I'm not sure if I mentioned that here or not. Oh yeah, I did. We do more than just websites and web applications. We do mobile, we do client application work. So whatever it is, if there's UI, we'll work and figure out the best way to address the issues that are there. It kind of turns into a it depends situation. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, so for like CRC desktop support, there is a user experience component to that, and it is a service.
Yes.
If that was going to be rolled out in a different manner.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we've done UX analysis of some of their touch points, Appointlet, which is what they use to set up appointments once they have a need for an appointment. We've done user experience research on those and suggested.
And like Bomgar, is Bomgar the tool that they use for remote desktop? Have you touched on that at all?
No, we haven't messed with that at all yet. We haven't done anything with those items. But one of the projects that we did do is one of the clients that's going to that you download to register your device at Stanford. It's called device registration. 1 minute left. Any last questions?
No, I was going to say time check. We're at 13:44.
Thank you for offering this.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, have fun going through have fun. I don't know if it's have fun, but go through the documents, feel free, and use them if it makes sense for you. Service release process or not. Nice seeing you, Susan.
Thanks,
Nice
you guys.
Good seeing you. See you tomorrow.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye. John just dumped out right away, didn't he?
He did. Still, all right.
Yep. I'm gonna stop recording.
Cool.